I'm Scott McGrath, Chief Development Officer of American Friends of Bar-Ilan University, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, Treating the Trauma of October 7th, Immediate Response, Long-Term Impact. I want to thank you all for coming and extend a special thanks to our friends in Canada and around the world for joining us today. Our special guests for this insider briefing are Professor Eshkol Rafaeli, Head of the Academic Steering Committee of Bar-Ilan University's Community Psychology Clinic, and Professor Yari Gvion, co-director of the clinic. They'll take us behind the scenes of the clinic's immediate response to the October 7th attacks, reveal the long-term breakthrough insights resulting from its research-based innovation, and speak to us about the mental health trauma and interventions required for our returning hostages after more than 470 days in captivity. What truly sets the clinic apart is that as it dealt with the immense emergency in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, it was also teaching the next generation of trauma specialists in real time. From my previous career in clinical social work, I can tell you that this ability to simultaneously address short and long-term mental health needs in the context of October 7th mass emergency is precisely what makes Bar-Ilan University's approach unique. Every crisis intervention serves three crucial purposes: treating today's trauma, researching tomorrow's solutions, and educating the specialists who will carry this knowledge forward. Before we get going, I want to share that we will have a dedicated Q&A section at the end of this webinar, so please do leave any questions you have here for Professor Rafaeli and Professor Gvion in the Q&A box on Zoom. Your support of Bar-Ilan ensures that it continues to impact tomorrow today, not only at the Community Psychology Clinic, but across the university departments. The development of life-changing services and technologies directly improve the lives of those most in need today, while creating stronger professionals for the future. For those of you who are looking to make a difference for Israel and for the world by giving to Bar-Ilan, you can do so by scanning the QR code on the screen or by visiting afbiu.org/donate/webinar. You'll also find this link in the comment section here on Zoom. For those of you from countries other than the US, please visit your local Friends of Bar-Ilan University website to make a donation. Without further ado, let's delve into this conversation with Professors Rafael and Gvion. So my first question for you today is, before October 7th, what were you and the Community Psychology Clinic doing that positioned Bar-Ilan University to respond so quickly and significantly to these attacks?
Okay, Scott. First, I want to thank you for this webinar, for the audience who came to share our things with us. Actually, our clinic has been here already for 55 years. Our clinic was established between the Six-Day War and Yom Kippur War, what in Israel we call the War of Attrition. So we are the oldest and largest university-based community mental health clinic in Israel. Since then, based on our model we created, several more academic clinics have been established, but their scope and their psychological services they provide are much more limited. We have 82 master's degree students in our team, and we have also 10 PhD interns, all of which receive intensive training from highly skilled clinical and rehab psychologists. The clinic provides diverse psychological treatments to members of the community. Altogether, the clinic is equipped to offer psychotherapy to 250 individuals at any given time. We also offer a range of services. We include an adult therapy unit, a child and family therapy unit, a rehab therapy unit for individuals coping with mental or physical illness, trauma, PTSD, and the families. We have special units focused on loss, grief, autism spectrum disorder, and borderline personality disorder. So we didn't start from scratch when this crisis unfolded. We had already laid the groundwork. What makes our response so effective is our structured approach. I want to suggest our clinical approach as multi-layer strategy. On the one hand, we provide direct services to community, while on the other, we serve as major training hub for future psychologists. We have 20 therapy rooms equipped with advanced monitoring system. This helps us offer real-time supervision and continuity, refine our therapeutic techniques, and this ensures that our therapy is top-notch and constantly evolving, with an inbuilt feedback loop to meet the patient's needs and goals. Additionally, we are part of Bar-Ilan University. It grants us access to leading specialists in fields such as trauma, loss, depression, anxiety, suicidal behavior, and beyond. We draw on to the latest research and evidence-based therapies, which are crucial during crisis. So we believe that we possess deep roots in the community, combined with expertise, infrastructure, and accessibility, all in one place. I believe that we deeply are dedicated to accessibility through reduced fees, online services, and very short waiting lists. This made us a well-established resource even before October the 7th. There's another point I want to mention is that the crisis impacts not only those directly involved, but also families, communities, and society as a whole, meaning that the need for mental health support has surged since October the 7th.
I'll step in. Scott, you're in charge of time, so you'll tell us if we are going too fast or too slow. I know you have other questions you want to ask us. But if there's a minute, I'll first of all thank you again to what Yari did. And add a couple of things that I think were also part of the strength of this clinic, October 6th, so before October 7th hit. And one of them is this network of alumni that we have. Yari is going to talk about it in a second when it comes to the actual response to the war. But we've been, I'd say, without humility, I think we could say that we've been the leading training program for clinical psychologists and rehabilitation psychologists in Israel for about 6 decades. And about 2,000 of those trainees have gone through our clinic and are very committed to it to this day. And Yari will say where that proved very, very helpful, really, as soon as October 7th happened. So this network of alumni of our program is very important. Another thing that again, was part of our DNA or part of our infrastructure, even before this war started, was the fact that there's a lot of expertise in trauma and in grief among our faculty and among our supervisors. And those, as we all know, became unfortunately really, really necessary in this year. And so we were able to put these to use really quickly. Am I forgetting anything we should be saying, Yari?
No, I think you elaborated enough, yes.
Okay.
I think it's hard to summarize all the ways you were prepared for something that you couldn't possibly foresee before it happened. But I think your answer really did a nice job of sort of setting the stage of what you were doing that made you able to respond so fast. So that leads into my next question, which is, in what ways has the clinic responded to the mental health challenges arising since October 7th in direct service to Israelis with acute needs at this time?
So actually, when the crisis hit, we were operating with a reduced staff. However, as Eshkol said earlier, we managed to mobilize 150 graduates, interns, and faculty members to establish a 24/7 hotline staffed entirely by volunteers. This became, I think, a lifeline for 3,000 callers, providing immediate support and listening ear during those first crucial days and weeks. Israeli was then, as you probably remember, in chaos. We got phone calls from diverse populations expressing fear, panic, hopelessness. Some of them even were affected directly from the events, others in more distant circles. We have senior staff supervising these students and interns with nightly debriefings. But as we know, trauma has a long tail, so we understood that the need for support would extend well beyond the initial weeks and months. So one of our first steps was to prioritize trauma-specific training for our teams, equipping them to handle the complexities involved. We developed specialized workshops for our interns and students to equip them with top-notch evidence-based practices for addressing trauma and loss. Additionally, we recruited more supervisors specializing in trauma and loss to provide extra support and supervision to other staff. We also recognize that isolation aggravates trauma, anxiety, and depression, so we started on January 24 to launch online support groups. This group provided help to distinct parts of the population. For example, I myself ran groups with another intern or student. In the evening, it was groups for reservists, joined from the northern border of Lebanon. Others were connected from the Gaza Strip, and some participated from home. There were alarms during those interactions, but we managed. Many challenges came up in this group, especially around the struggle to reconcile their experience during the war with expectations of civilian life. Many of the combat participants shared that they felt the unit members were the only ones who truly understood them, while at home, everyone just expected them to return to normal. This group weren't so much about processing trauma, but more about helping them transition, validating their feelings, and fostering a sense of understanding. And in the morning, I met the reservist spouses. They mostly talked about the heavy burden on their shoulders, along with the fear they felt for their husbands. Many times they also expressed frustration, fear, and even anger towards their husbands when they came home on leave but didn't participate in household responsibilities or parenting. Something like, when I asked him to understand what I was going through with 3 children at home making me crazy, the education system didn't work regularly, and asked him to help me with the garbage with children, he told me that he didn't sleep all night because he had nightmares. So those groups were very important. While those groups continued to run, we realized that some of the persons in these support groups needed more than that. They required focused one-to-one therapy or couple therapy or family therapy. So through the support group and their channels, we identified individuals who would benefit from additional assistance and offered discounted sessions, particularly for reservists, the spouses, couples, families. It could also be online. And then the war progressed. The demand for mental health support in Israel became overwhelming. Consequently, academic and civilian centers such as Ben-Gurion University and Sapir College reached out to us to partnership to help reduce waiting times for treatment. One significant and touching partnership we have with the Sderot Resilience Center, where we launched a program to provide remote therapy and mental health screening for the waiting list of 3,000 individuals. We successfully diagnosed and provided psychotherapy for nearly 200 individuals by now, children, youth, adults, offering both individual and group therapy. A lot of people in Sderot in the kibbutzim on Gaza envelope are struggling with serious avoidance issues, sleep problems, flashback, PTSD, depression, suicidal behavior. They have been living with threats and uncertainty for over 20 years, but on October 7th, everything hit a breaking point. People saw the terrorists up close in the neighborhood, in their houses, witnessed the horrors on streets. Only in Sderot, about 70 people were assassinated in the massacre, including a number of cops. The level of distress is overwhelming, but we are seeing some small improvements. For example, there's a kid who hadn't left the shelter room for 3 months, not even to use the bathroom, but now he's going back to school. There's also a woman who wouldn't let her kids go outside, and now she's back at work. The downside is that the situation is still very fragile. Every time there's an alarm or missile attack, it sets them back badly. Another project we started only recently stems from understanding the crises have lasting effects, and it is important to equip people with long-term coping tools. Therefore, we introduced 4-session workshop. This is one of Eshkol project with interns and students. We focus on resilience and coping, tailoring them for specific population. For instance, we develop workshop for residents in Gaza envelope who face ongoing threats, and separate workshop for those who displaced from their homes, as well as for professionals such as therapists, educational staff, whom we provide training resources. Additionally, we launched a program specifically for families, brief family intervention, 4 or 5 sessions designed to help families cope with stress of having parent or combat or living in a constant state of threat. I believe that our deep roots in community, in our proactive community-based approach, help us facilitate this collaboration. coupled with university affiliation that fosters culture of research, learning, and innovation. One last point I want to emphasize again is that it is essential to highlight the impact of war that extends far beyond these directly affected. We refer to these individual as forgotten sufferers. Those are people that, while not visibly impacted, struggle with worse mental health challenges, including complex trauma and anxiety. And as for our staff, I want to say another word of gratitude for our staff. It has a challenging year, but yet very gratifying. We learned a lot, learning experience. We're hopeful to serve an inspiration for continued growth. I hope I answered your question. Maybe Eshkol has something to add.
Eshkol, we have
what you
2
said.
more minutes if you'd like to contribute.
Oh, maybe a point that is coming through what Yari is saying is that we found ourselves
Connection is very
asking
strong.
institutions in Israel. Oh, let me see if I can do something about that. Is this any
That's
better?
bad. That's improved.
Okay now. Mhm.
Okay. So we found ourselves asking ourselves in the very first few weeks of this war whether this is going to be all about trauma and post-trauma, or whether the fact that we are a clinic that knows how to work with all sorts of problems is going to be a strength. And we're seeing more and more how prescient that was, because it's, trauma, of course, and PTSD in particular is very, very prevalent right now. But so are so many other problems. The examples that Yari gave of these family strife issues that were coming up for reservists and their spouses, the issues with the children who were displaced or with the children of reservists, problems with mood, not just post-traumatic stress, but also mood and substance use. All those things have been really increasing.
Violence.
Right.
This-
And having a clinic that knows how to think about all these different aspects and work across different specialties and apply knowledge from experts in each one of these areas has been really, really crucial to the response itself, to keeping ourselves really flexible and keeping. And I remember being incredibly impressed by you, Yari, in the first few days of this, where you set up the hotline on October 7th. By October 8th, it was already up and running, but there would be these nightly meetings to debrief between all the people who were on the hotline. And every day there would be some new innovation. There would be some new realization of what we need to do differently the next day, how it needs to be, how the calls should be handled, how the information should be organized. It was a moving process, but it was implemented so quickly and so beautifully that I was in awe of that.
Thank you both. I can speak from my own experience as a former mental health practitioner that it's really amazing to me to think about how deeply and widely you thought about the response, how deep you needed to go in terms of interventions with individuals, with groups, with families, but also how widely you thought about the ripples of impact that this would have, the term forgotten sufferers. I think this is something that mental health practitioners and organizations struggle with on a day-to-day basis, but to be able to do that in a time of crisis and chaos is really just it's truly admirable and awe-inspiring. So thank you for that work. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what you've learned. So how has the clinic's response to October 7th and the unique challenges that existed after paved the way for developing new long-term techniques and methodologies for addressing mental health crises?
I think I'll take this question, but Yari, you will step in if you have things to add. I'll start by saying that I think if you ask me this question tomorrow or in a week, I'll probably have a different answer. This is such an unprecedented crisis that we have to keep adjusting ourselves. We can't come up with a new solution and then stick to it. We have to keep thinking of solutions, keep understanding where we're needed, and really remain innovative in our own clinic, but also in what we then put out to the rest of the world, because our mission as a university-based clinic is threefold. It's to help the people that walk through our doors or online through all these online efforts that we're doing right now. It's to train students who we have for this year, or maybe for a couple of years, maybe for a little bit longer, but then they go off to other places and we get other students to train. And it's also to create protocols and methods that can be disseminated and tested in this sandbox of a clinic that we have, and then expanded elsewhere. And so there's this constant look for what are we innovating, and are we innovating enough as we're doing it? And we probably will have new things to say about it in a week or in a month if you have us back here on the webinar again. But I'll give a few examples of the things that have started. I think the first thing is this idea of a rapid response protocol, and a lot of it was tried and tested in this hotline that Yari and some other colleagues were the ones who founded and ran for really until today. But the busiest months were the immediate first months of the war. So it started running October 8th. And I think many of those 3,000 calls were handled by, I'd say, January or February, and then things slowed down. The sense of urgency changed to other things. But those thousands of calls were a way of figuring out, what sort of information should be at the fingertips of the clinicians, what should be the protocol that they have in their hands, and then which populations should be addressed. And so from the hotline and the contents that we developed for it, we moved to the group therapy models and try to think what would be the best and most effective ways to do psychological first aid in a group format and remotely. And we did it remotely because we wanted to have access to anybody in the country, actually, or abroad. We had some people from abroad as well joining those groups. Just groups that could be scalable, could be applied with reservists, with their families, with senior citizens, with parents of young children. We had a variety of populations, and with each one we tweaked it, created protocols, and started to think about what sort of data we would need to see if this is making an impact, see if this is moving the needle. It also meant capitalizing on the fact that we've all gone through 3 or 4 years now of COVID, and the lessons that taught us for how to work remotely or in person or in a hybrid sort of way, and how to get people to do what we're doing right now. I think you're not in the office anymore, right? It's 7:30 p.m. here, 7:24 p.m. here. We're both at home, and yet we're working, and this ability to work through Zoom or other platforms, and yet keep records in an organized and ethical way, manage the really sensitive clinical data that we're collecting. Those were all really important. And then move towards short-term interventions that could be applied to many patients so that we can clear up the time for clinicians that need to working with the longer-term cases and the more complex cases. That's a term that's worth mentioning here that I think is known in the mental health world, but is only now making its way to Israel, is the idea of stepped care or stratified care. So if there are mental health folks out there in the audience, you all might have heard this. This is a system that's been most developed, I think, in the UK, in the United Kingdom, with a program called Increasing Access to Psychological Therapies, or IAPT, or IAPT. IAPT is a solution that the British National Health Service created for a mental health crisis that is happening everywhere in the world, but that is so much worse right now here. And it's the crisis of having so many people in distress and not enough well-trained clinicians to do treatment as usual in the old sense, longer-term treatments. And so what the British did, and what Israel, I think, in many ways is trying to learn from right now, is this idea of creating this stepped care or stratified care system. And we see part of our job as people who are both clinicians and researchers and program developers is to really think about how that should be done, how the training should be done, what the materials should be, who should get this training, and then test it out. Not just think about it theoretically, but actually test it out in our own clinic. And so this idea of thinking about where it is that brief and focused interventions are going to be useful and just enough for the time being, and where it is that people need to be stepped up to higher levels of care, some of which in our own clinic, some of which by referring out. That's a major part of what we're trying to do. And actually the funding that we recently got from the the Chicago Federation, from the Jewish United Fund of Chicago, is going to be wonderfully supportive of that, the ability to keep developing this work on brief and focused interventions, which we've been scaling up from one-on-one therapy sessions to groups to 16-session protocols, whatever it's needed, doing it, creating these transferable models, and then going out and speaking about it with other institutions, developing training materials that are based on our very real experience with patients, collaborating, as Yari said, with the Sderot Resilience Center, but collaborating with other places as well to build these sustainable models of ongoing community mental health support. Because a lot of this is going to be about community, whether the community is resilient or not. I mean, I think anybody who's been following the state of things in Israel has seen that the last year and 3 months have showed us the worst of us and the best of us. The lack of institutional response in many cases and in many government agencies, not just in the first day, but for weeks and sometimes months, was pretty crushing for many people. And on the other hand, the sense of innovation and involvement that we see from our students, that we see from our faculty, that we see from our
Bar-Ilan University.
alumni, right, and from the university as a whole, has been really, really invigorating in a way, or at least a consolation for the level of devastation around us. So I don't know if we have another minute or two to go into more detail, but I'll say that I think we're moving beyond just symptom management to thinking about how we should be building resilience, which is why we're thinking of our clinic, which has been around for 50 or 55 years under the name of just a community mental health clinic, to think about it as the community resilience clinic, that thinks about resilience and not just about symptomatic care. And the hope is that this, A, serves our patients of the moment, B, builds capacity for future work in the students that go through our training and other trainees who work with us, and then creates evidence-based protocols for working with mass trauma responses, which is where we see our contribution as an academic center.
Thank you. I know there's so much more to say on each of these questions, each of these topics, but I want to move on to one that's particularly timely and top of mind for many people, and that's obviously, on Sunday we watched with great relief and hope as Romy Gonan, Doron Steinbrecher, and Emily Damari returned home to Israel after spending 471 days in Hamas captivity. So what can you tell us about the mental health preparations and interventions required for what we pray will be all the remaining hostages in Gaza on their return to Israel? And at this long-awaited stage in the war, what impact can it have on the people of Israel as a whole as they return?
Yari, tell me if you want to jump in and take this one, but we were talking about it in advance about this question, and both of us felt that Sunday was such a complex day emotionally for everybody involved, and anybody here who's connected to Israel knows this. It was a day where there was some sense of relief. We could breathe that sigh of relief when we saw the 3 women walking, on their own feet and in relatively okay physical shape. Who knows exactly what their psychological shape is, and everybody is trying to be respectful of the fact that it's going to take some time for them to be able to really appear publicly and speak about these horrific things that they've gone through. That same day was also the day that the body of Oron Shaul was returned. Oron Shaul was a soldier who was killed a decade ago, or almost 11 years ago, and whose body was also kept in captivity by the Hamas. And the morning started even before the release of the 3 hostages, with the news that his body was found and repatriated so that there could be a burial. So there's a sense in which there's some relief there too for the family. His father has already passed away. His mother is not in great health, but she was in the media a lot about the sense of closure that she needed to be able to bury her son. And I mention this because I think that there's, first of all, still so many families that are waiting for that moment This current very tenuous ceasefire is not a simple thing to go through emotionally. I think I say as an understatement for any Israeli right now. It's that there's the sense that it could crumble at any moment. There's the sense that there's a great price that's being paid for it. There's that sense of unevenness and the slow trickling of released hostages, which is testing everybody's ability to regulate emotionally through these things. So it's hard. And when we think specifically about the hostages, the released hostages themselves and their families, I think everybody recognizes that this is going to be a slow, slow, slow process. It's a slow recovery that requires all sorts of support, um, both psychological and medical, but also community-wide, social, educational, professional. In every sense, there's going to be needs for all sorts of support systems, some of which we feel we have expertise in, some of which we know colleagues who have expertise in other parts of the university or in other institutions. Um, we have a pretty good partnership with Sheba Hospital, which is the primary place where hostages get flown to in most cases um, when they are released. And actually, one of our colleagues, maybe you can speak about the work that Professor Tamar Zilberg from our department is doing. But one of our colleagues was the person who created the protocol at Sheba Hospital for how the hospital should behave around the repatriation of the children hostages in the first wave of release back more than a year ago, last November. Um, so with attention and details to every single thing, what should the rooms look like? Who should have access to that wing, to that floor? What should be the personal connection of a particular therapist assigned to the case, who then accompanies them while they're in the hospital, but also afterwards? And I think what we heard from Dr. Zilberg, our colleague, but we've heard from others as well, is that each case is really unique, and each case requires a very different treatment plan that depends on a bunch of parameters: what level of support they have organically from their family or community, what level of pre-existing problems they might have had. Um, Obviously, what it is that they endured, the conditions that they were in were all horrible, but some of them were beyond the pale horrible, and some of them were in conditions where they, at least saw sunlight or at least received adequate nutrition. Some of them didn't. So each of these cases is really, really unique, and the knowledge of how to handle it, which everybody hopes we'll never have to use in the future, is a knowledge that I think is being written right now, is a knowledge that is being developed right now in ways that have never been tested or tried before. Maybe I'll say one more word about sort of the way we structure our clinic, because I think there's what we have now, and then there's what we hope to do as we expand into the future. Our clinic has been around for more than 5 decades. It has a lot of expertise in trauma and in loss and in working with children and families and adults. But what we're hoping to do, what we've been working on in the past year, is to develop these centers within it that specialize in whatever is needed in the moment. So our judgment of this over this past year was that one area that is sorely needed is work with grief and loss. And so we've developed a lot of resources to that and created the Loss, Grief, and Rehabilitation Center. And also this work with brief and focused interventions for these wider and wider circles of people who are suffering but maybe forgotten, the way Yari spoke about it. But our hopes for the next year or two are to open up a few more of these centers. And one of them is a center focused on children and families that'll be able to increase the work we do in that regard. We have some initial projects in those regard. We want to have the ability to do in the infrastructure to do more of that. Another one is a center focused on infant trauma. That's an area where we have several experts in the department who are really leading world experts on this, and we want to be able to bring their academic knowledge together with the resources to apply that in the clinic. And obviously continue the work in these other areas that we're working on. Yari, what else should I be saying in this regard?
I think we'll
Oh,
just jump
you're on
into
mute.
the next question, which is the last question before the Q&A. And I think a lot of what we've talked about already and what you were just speaking about really ties into this final question, which is really how can we be helpful? So why is additional philanthropic support necessary to sustain the clinic and its work in the aftermath of October 7th? And why do you need this funding sooner rather than later?
Yeah, you were saying something earlier, and your mute was on, so I don't know if you want to unmute
No, it
and
was regarding the former question, but never mind, proceed, and maybe afterwards I'll add a bit. Okay?
great. So first of all, we really appreciate the support we have gotten this year. We got some of it from the university itself, some of it from small foundations that chipped in, and then this most recent really sizable support that we got from the Chicago Federation is truly, instrumental in us being able to adapt the work that we do and to adapt it and to keep adapting it. And so for us to be able to expand it to other areas, to expand the number of people that we see through the clinic, to expand the number of trainees, either our own students or others who come in and get the specialized training in areas in which we're experts in, and to accompany all of that with the right kind of program evaluation, which is something that we see as crucial as again as academics is really important. So we want to be able to look back in, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, look back at this crisis time that we've all gone through and, mourn the losses and grieve what needs to be grieved, but also say that we rose to the occasion, that we use this as a time to expand and change what needed to be changed in mental health care, to do this in a way that that sticks true to the mission that we have, which is to be researcher practitioners. So people who keep researching what it is that we do, trying to improve it, trying to apply the best and most recent knowledge that we have about trauma, about mood, about personality, about children and families, about any of these things, and keep developing it. So the hope is to first get these centers that we've already created, the Loss, Grief, and Rehabilitation Center and the Brief and Focus Intervention Center, to get them to be stabilized, to have a core staff in each of them that can carry this work forward in a prolonged way. Right now, we know we have funding for this year, which is wonderful, but we need to think about how to sustain this in a longer term and how to build programs that will be able to be disseminated elsewhere. And then to open these additional centers, trauma, the child and family intervention, and the infant trauma center, and to do it all while we continue to work on these techniques of monitoring, assessing, and utilizing data in the therapy that we do it. There's a way in which Yari and I sometimes joke that this is our reserve duty. We're both, I think, beyond reserve age, although some people our age, I think, have been volunteering for reserve duty. But we feel like this is has been our reserve duty this past year and some, is to try and think where is it that we can mobilize ourselves and mobilize our staff, mobilize our colleagues and our students to be giving better support right now and to do it in a way that is sustainable. I don't know if that answered your question, Scott, but that's sort of the guiding principle for us. And sometimes it means translating into very actionable goals. We already mentioned that in routine years before the war started, we would see 250 patients, sometimes even a little bit more, but that would be the general numbers. And our hope now is to break the 1,000 patient barrier, to get the clinic to do so much more and to do it more efficiently and to do it year round, to do it in a way that we'll be proud of and that our students will learn from, so that they can then have these ripple effects when they move on to their next placements or their next careers.
Thank you for that. I know we've covered a lot of ground, and this is at the end of a long and tiring work days for both of you. I want to open it up now to some of the questions that have been coming in through our Zoom question and answer box. There are several questions, not surprisingly, I'm going to take some liberty and try and condense a few of them. A lot of the questions really seem to have picked up on the sense of both urgency and volume and scale of the work that needs to be done. And people are wanting to know, like, what are some of the practical solutions you foresee, either, leveraging current resources, expanding resources, using technology, using international collaborations, maybe with English speakers or Hebrew speakers that aren't licensed in Israel. What can be done to really meet this seemingly insurmountable challenge of providing care for people who need it right now?
I'm seeing you coughing, and no, Yari just got the flu and is under the weather. So I'll take the first stab at this question, but jump in if you have other thoughts. First of all, there's been an outpouring of involvement and engagement in the mental health world from people around the world. I saw in the chat, I didn't have a chance to read through all the questions, but I saw some familiar names, including a colleague from Argentina, Patricia Escobardo, who's a colleague from the schema therapy world. Shout out to all the schema therapists out there. And Patricia was part of organizing a network of many therapists from Latin-speaking countries, I think mostly from Argentina, but elsewhere as well, to help with Israeli efforts. That's harder for us to utilize that in our clinic because our clinic is based on our responsibility towards our trainees in the first place. And so we want to be able to first make sure that we're taking care of the patients that walk through our door or access us through Zoom, with the help of our almost 100 therapists in our clinic, while we're also being mindful of the training stage that they're in. But I know that there are other ways in which mental health professionals have become involved in other places, and we applaud that, and I think it's wonderful. So that's the international aspect of things. In terms of technology, I think that we're on the cusp of figuring a lot of things out. We do some things and we should be doing even more. And part of that is a question of resources. But let me say a couple words technically about the way our clinic works. I think ahead of the curve with technology as it is, and where it is that we hope to be moving with it in the future. So because we were a research and academic-based clinic, we transitioned sometime over the past decade or so into a framework where every patient who walks into our clinic knows that it's a research training clinic, and with their permission, of course, they have to consent to this, but if they consent, we have cameras and microphones in the rooms that allow us to record the sessions. That recording is used in supervision. So instead of my trainees or Yari's trainees showing up and telling us what they think happened in the session, we can open the screen and look at the session and look at moments that they felt that they struggled or moments where they felt that they excelled, and give them direct feedback based on their actual practice. This is a trend that's happening in the mental health world called deliberate practice, but we've been doing it even before that name appeared. We've been doing deliberate practice in our clinic precisely for this reason. We think that the best way for somebody to learn this very delicate work of being a psychotherapist is to get feedback about what it is that they do. So we've outfitted those 20 rooms in the clinic with cameras and microphones. There are a couple of rooms that even have psychophysiological recording equipment in case we want to look at how people's physiology changes. But for the most part, it's being able to record and then go back and look at the sessions in very specific detail, and not through recollection, not through sitting back and saying, what is it that I think happened in this session? And that's a whole other level of training that uses technology we've all had around for many years, video recording and audio recording, but on a scale that is unprecedented. The other thing that's created is it's created a database of, I think by now, about 20,000 therapy sessions from the past few years, 20,000 therapy sessions that are recorded, saved very securely on our servers, and it can be reanalyzed in all sorts of ways. Some of them by having our graduate students review sessions and code them. But this is where the really exciting technological stuff is happening now, by being able to run it through natural language processing or other AI techniques that can help understand things that we may have not even detected about the therapy process or about the therapy interchange, the communication, the language, the facial expressions, the vocal aspects. Those are all things that colleagues of ours in the department, as well as we ourselves, have been very involved in trying to get as much information, sort of extract as much information out of real therapy sessions, not simulated ones, but real therapy sessions. And with this large data set of sessions, be able to teach ourselves and then teach the field as a whole what could be done differently. For example, a student who was a master's student and PhD student and did his internship in the clinic and recently graduated and took a lot of these ideas with him to work in one of the hospitals nearby, did a lot of work on vocal features in therapy sessions. What is it that happens to therapists and patients' voices? By looking at the recordings and seeing how is it in very, very delicate ways that therapists help their patients regulate their emotions by changing their tone of voice, but doing it not in one case example, but on hundreds of sessions. I'm thinking of Dr. Adar Paz, who's a recent graduate of ours. There are other examples of students who do this kind of work, colleagues who do this kind of work. And I think the next stage, and we're trying to build up the resources to be able to do this technologically, is the fact that with new cloud-based processing systems, there are ways of transcribing sessions in a minute. So as opposed to our students having to spend an average of 5 to 6 hours listening to a recording of the session and transcribing it.
This is happening already. Eshkol, this is happening already. It starts from next week.
So it's starting next week?
Yeah,
Talk about it.
Next week, yeah. Yeah.
So I knew we were in negotiations with Amazon Web Services, the AWS, as the system that we'll be using to save our data very, very securely, but at the same time permit us to do these analyses. And then these analyses are going to ideally teach us about what is it that makes therapy even more effective. How is it that we can detect things that maybe the naked eye doesn't detect. So this is where we're hoping to move on. It's exciting stuff. It's technically challenging stuff. So we need the IT support for it. We need the data science support for it that we're trying to gather. But those are other areas in which, sort of to go back to your last question of where is it that we need support, this is where we support in a way.
So I have two more sort of clusters of questions. I have so many questions, and I apologize that I'm not going to be able to get to any of them, but we've got a mechanism to answer them offline, so I'll share that later. But the two that seem to be coming up a lot, I'll start with one, and that's obviously the soldiers and the reservists, especially the reservists as they're transitioning back and forth with high degrees of frequency from life in the military, serving in very perilous conditions, back to sort of regular day-to-day life. What are you, what are we, what is the country doing to support those transitions back and forth?
Oh, that's a very good question, I think. They need a lot of support. Many of them lost their jobs. Many of them have many marital problems. Many of them, even we have students who in the middle of classes go to reserve. It's a very difficult conditions. What we can offer is mental health aid through we give them therapies, reduced fees therapies. We can give them online therapies. We give marital therapy. But these are populations that suffers a lot during this crisis and is going to still suffer because the war didn't end. We have plenty of security challenges to meet, and we hope.
And there's definitely a sense that there's not enough services being given to them. So we're trying to find ways in which we can be part of the solution. It's a huge problem. It's a huge problem that is, I think, plaguing Israel as a whole right now, and we want to do our part in it.
And it's not only them; it's the families. Okay, everyone here is suffering from that. Okay, children, wives. until now, we treated about 80 reservists in groups and individually. And the number is going to grow up. And we want to help them with reduced fees of therapy because it's needed. Yeah.
And are they finding you, or are you doing outreach to make sure they understand that these supports are available to them?
No, we advertise and
it's always a tricky balance for us between the capacity that we have and the wish to do even more. And so we advertise, we always do it cautiously because we can't be inundated with a huge amount that we won't be able to give support to. As soon as we have the capacity, we advertise more. We bring in more people. We've focused a lot of the attention this past year, and Yari and the co-director of the clinic, Dr. Maya Wolf, have spent a lot of time building this very specific bridge to the Sderot community. Some of them are also reservists. So I remember in one of the groups that I ran, I was working with a person who was present in Sderot on October 7th. Her husband was immediately called up on reserve. They weren't physically harmed, but they did spend close to 24 hours in a safe room. And then they were relocated, as many people from Sderot were, for months and months. She had little children. She was a mental health professional in her own right, and her husband was on reserve duty. So you can think about it from all these sorts of angles. Support her as a colleague who could use some of the techniques and tools in her own work. She was a social worker. B, she could be a displaced person, as many people from the Gaza envelope and from the north were and still are. C, she was dealing with her husband's reserve duty. D, she was herself somebody who I don't think was badly traumatized, but certainly went through a traumatic experience. And so from all those angles, we try to think about the right services to build and then implement them and then advertise them to the best of our ability.
So I'm going to ask one final question, which really deserves a lot more time to answer, but see if we can sort of get through some of it before we have to wrap up at 1. And the question was really about the worldwide rise of anti-Semitism and the very visual support for Hamas. And how is that adding to the impact of the mental health toll in Israel? How is it showing up in your clinics with the people that you're seeing?
I'm not sure that directly, but I know that when we launched the group, I was thinking of launching a group to Israelis who live or study in the States in order to help them with anti-Semitism. It didn't happen, but I think we can do it. I think it is very important to do that because there are many people, Israelis, Jewish, who would like to be part in groups, yes, that we're doing for that. Yes, but directly, I don't think we deal with that, okay, because we live here.
And I'll say something as an Israeli academic who traveled to a couple of conferences this year. I feel personally lucky to be in the field that we're in. It feels like the mental health field has maybe less of this than some other fields. And so I've heard from colleagues in other areas of the university who were disinvited from conferences or who felt very unwelcome in research visits. We haven't had that, at least I haven't had that experience among colleagues in my field. In fact, it felt a lot of outpouring of support in the specific communities that I'm a part of. So psychotherapy researchers on the one hand, schema therapists on the other hand, have been wonderful and supportive. I think there are more subtle ways in which this affects us and affects our patients. And it has to do with that sense of, drawing inwards. There are people who are giving up and leaving the country. The numbers are sadly growing of people who feel very disenchanted or hurt by the sort of this crack in the social contract between the country and its citizens that happened on October 7th, the fact that security and safety wasn't there. But for many other people, there's just a sense of, okay, we're here, we're on this, essentially on this island. And while we're on this island, we better make this work. So that's been an impact that I've seen, in patients that I see or in patients that my students see and I supervise the therapy on.
But still, if you know about students or Jewish who wish to get help from us or be part of groups, we'll be happy to join in. Yeah, I think we'll have many things to contribute for them. Yeah.
Thank you both. I know that I learned a lot today, and I've had many conversations with Eshkol in particular over the past few months. And every time I speak with him or members of your team, I learn more about not just your dedication to the work that you're doing, but the innovative ways in which you're doing it and how forward-thinking you are. And it's just it's really inspiring and hopeful in a time when hope is very much needed. So thank you for that. Unfortunately, we have to wrap up. We're almost out of time. So I want to thank all of our listeners for tuning in to today's webinar. And obviously, of course, thank you again to our guests, Professors Rafaeli and Gvion, for this meaningful and insightful discussion and for all the work that you do through your clinics. I also want to thank again the Jewish United Fund of Metropolitan Chicago, JUF, for the recent support of the Brief and Focused Intervention Center inaugurated this past year within the Community Resilience Clinic. This gift really enabled the clinic to operate its triage hotline. It's going to provide dedicated supervision and training to its trainees, and it's going to increase the number of interns who, under supervision, will now be able to provide more timely service to over 1,000 individuals annually. So thank you once again to JUF for your generosity and the impact that it's going to have on so many Israelis. Finally, I want to apologize again to all those people who asked really thoughtful questions that we weren't able to get to on the webinar, where we invited you in the chat, and I'll invite you again to send those questions to info@afbiu.org, and we'll make sure that they get answered. There was also some requests to connect directly with Professors Gvion and Rafaeli. So again, just send us an email to info@afbiu.org, and we'll make sure those connections happen. Once again, I'd like to encourage you, if you've not already done so, to make a donation to this meaningful and critical work using the QR code on the screen or the link afbiu.org/donate-webinar. And then I'll just end by thanking everyone for your interest, your time, and your support, especially right now as it's really top of mind for everyone as these hostages return home. Thank you all.